Hey, it's Art from My New Microphone. In this video, let's discuss why you should be using effects, sends, and returns in your mixes. Effects, sends, and returns are specific routing actions that we can take within our mixing sessions, whether that be in a mixer or inside a digital audio workstation. The send controls of a track will control the amount of that track's signal that will be sent to an effects return or auxiliary channel without affecting the overall output or the inserts of that track. Sends can be either pre-fader, where they are independent of the track's fader position, or post-fader, where the fader position will have an effect on how much the send level will be. The return channel, more often called an auxiliary track or an aux track, will take this sent audio in its input and route it to where it needs to go, often to the mix bus or to another subgroup within the mix. These auxiliary tracks cannot be used to record audio, however, they are more than enough to process audio, hence the name effects returns. The big benefit of using auxiliary tracks or return channels is that we can set up our effects and have independent control over the effects relative to the dry original signal. In this way, we can have the dry original signal on the track or bus that is sending audio to the return channel, and then our own auxiliary track complete with fader control for our effects. For starters, the independent level or fader control of these auxiliary tracks gives us tremendous control over bringing in whatever processes are on these aux tracks into the mix. We also have the benefit of inserting multiple processes in these effects returns or auxiliary channels. So for example, let's say we had an individual track with a reverb insert on it. We would have to go into that reverb and adjust the wet and dry controls to ensure that the ratio between the dry unprocessed signal and the reverberant signal were adequate for the mix. But we wouldn't have any more control than that specific reverb plugin would give us over the actual sound of the reverb. By setting up an effects return or auxiliary track and having the reverb there, we can then go ahead and add EQ before or after to help shape the reverb. We can compress it a little bit if need be, add saturation and other effects to that specific reverb effects channel without affecting the original dry track whatsoever. Additionally, if we have a bus or group of instruments together, say a drum bus for example, we could get away with setting up a snare delay for example on an auxiliary channel and then not have that delay present whatsoever in the drum bus within the mix. The snare track in this example would have its output bused to the drum bus. However, it would have a send to an auxiliary track that has a delay on it, so that the delay would only affect the snare drum, and the actual snare track would be the only thing being sent into the drum bus. We can even set multiple tracks up to send audio to a single auxiliary track or effects return, and then process this effects return with a common and independent effect for all of the tracks being sent to it. So that's why effects, sends, and returns are so important and valuable in a mix and why you should be using them in yours. But enough of me talking, let's hop into our digital audio workstation and see these effects, sends, and returns in action. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro, where we will be discussing effects, sends, and returns or auxiliary tracks within our mixing session. In this session, we'll be working on a song called The Unending Maze by one of my projects called Blunt Cousin. And so we see here we have drums, bass, lots of vocals, and guitars right here. These instruments are bussed together. We can see many of them over here, including the drum bus, bass, vocals, sub-vocal groups right here, as well as the guitars right here. And we'll notice that a lot of these buses are being sent to effects returns. But before we get to the buses, I want to start by looking at a few tracks that are being sent to effects returns, and these are the guitars right here. So these are individual tracks. I'll bring up the mixer a little bit, and we can see that we have two guitars that are panned to the hard left, and then two guitars that are panned to the hard right. And I'll actually bring these closer together. And so the left panned guitars are being sent to bus 30 and the right panned guitars are being sent to bus 31. Now, if we look here, we have bus 30 and 31 right here. So these are the only tracks that are being sent to these effects returns. And these are set up effectively as opposite side delays. So if we were to look at these that are hard panned left being sent to 30, we have 30 right here, which is being hard panned to the right. And it is being affected by just Logic stock tape delay right here with a 16th note delay and a 16% feedback. The same is true, but in the opposite direction for these guitars right here that are panned to the hard right, being sent to 31. 31 comes in and then is being hard panned to the left with a same situation right here with the stock tape delay. I actually have a video on this opposite side delay or reverb technique. I will leave a card to it up here and a link to that video in the description box down below. But if we were to listen to just the left pan guitars without their effects return, it would sound like this. And with the opposite side delay, it would sound like this. And I can have control over this independent of the original track. So in this case, I wanted it to be really subtle, but you saw there that I would have independent fader control over this as well. And if I really wanted to, in this situation, I could go up here and apply other effects such as EQ or compression just to the tape delay without affecting these channels whatsoever. So for example, if I really wanted to bandpass this delay, I could do something like this. A being it. And that's only going to affect the opposite side delay. It will not affect the original channels right here. Whereas if I was to bring this delay over and put it directly on the track, I would have to go in and adjust the wet dry control. And then I suppose I would have a little bit of EQ control right here. However, it's not nearly as in-depth as a proper EQ plugin. And there's no other processes such as compression or saturation or what have you in this particular plugin. So I'm actually really limited to what's available in the actual plugin itself when I'm inserting plugins, especially effects plugins like delay, reverb, etc., directly on the track, rather than having it as its own effects return channel, like so. Additionally, you see here that these guitars, along with all of the other guitars, are being outputted to bus 3. If we go over here, we see that bus 3 is the rhythm guitar group. However, these opposite side delays are right here on their own independent effects returns or auxiliary tracks. And so adjusting these effects over here will not affect what is being sent at all to this rhythm guitar bus or group over here. So that's an important note to take into consideration when opting to use auxiliary tracks or effects sends and returns. We also see that even though in the intro only these two tracks are playing, there are actually multiple tracks being sent to each of these effects returns. So in the case that both of these tracks right here were playing, or both of these tracks were playing, both of their signals would be summed together when being sent to their own proper effects return here. And even better, if we go over here to have a look at the drums, we see that our kick, snare, overheads, and toms are all being bused to bus 1. And if we look over here at bus 1, we have our drum bus. And on this drum bus, we are affecting all of those tracks, of course, with common compression and EQ. However, if we go down here to our sends, we see that we're sending all of the audio in the drum bus to bus 2 and to bus 6. So bus 6 over here is a sort of pseudo ambient drum room effects return in which there is Chromaverb, which is the stock reverb plugin from Logic, as well as an EQ and a compressor. And then we have actually both of these channels, the drum bus and the drum room effects return, being sent to bus 2. And if we scroll over here, we have bus 2 as the parallel compression right here. Now, typically parallel processing is looked at a little bit differently than effects returns or auxiliary tracks, but really they're set up the same exact way. I also have a video dedicated to parallel processing. I'll leave a card up here and a link to that video in the description box down below. But I just wanted to get it out of the way that parallel processing or effects returns are really set up the same way, where in this case we have the drum bus and the drum room both being sent over here to this effects return, which is effectively the parallel compression channel. So not only can we send multiple tracks to a effects return, but we can also send an entire bus or group of instruments via a bus to an effects return as well. So there's a lot more going on in terms of auxiliary tracks in this mix, but the only other thing that we should really go over to really complete our discussion on effects sends and returns or auxiliary tracks is to actually look at the send levels right here. So you see in this bus right here, we have my vocals, Art Sings, and we have a lot of different sends here going on. So we have bus 21, which is the delay right, 22, which is a delay to the left, 23, which is my own delay, and bus 24, which is another delay. So there's a lot going on here, but if we actually look at these sends right here, I have negative 26.9 going to bus 21, negative 29.2 dB going to bus 22, 0 and 0 going to 23 and 24. And if I click on each of these, I see that they are all post pan, which means that they are also post fader. Looking at all of these, yep, they're all post pan. So what that means is that once the signal passes through these effects right here, these inserts, I'm sending negative 26.9 to bus 21 of that signal. I'm sending negative 29.2 dB of that signal to bus 22, and then I'm sending whatever that signal is at unity to bus 23 and 24. And also these send levels are being affected by this volume fader right here. So at negative 3.7, I'll actually be decreasing the send level by another 3.7 dB right here. And if that was at unity, then these would all be sending exactly what they are set to right here. And if this fader was set all the way to negative infinity, then nothing would actually be sending out of this bus right here. However, if I was to change this now to pre-fader, then it wouldn't matter if this was negative infinity, this would still be sending at unity gain. So we do have control over the send level at the sends right here. For example, if we go to this Vox bus, I have negative 16 dB, and this is again post-pan, so it's acting post-fader as well. So I hope all that makes sense and that you see the power and versatility of effects sends and returns or auxiliary tracks in your mixes and how you can use them yourself. Let's hop out of Logic Pro. So I hope I've convinced you to use effects sends and returns in your mixes if you haven't already. And if you have been using them, I hope that this video has sort of unlocked a few different ways of using these within your mixes that you haven't thought of before. If you found this information valuable, I would invite you to hit that like button and also to check out my mixing cheat sheet in the description box down below. I'll leave a link there. Of course, there are no such thing as cheat codes in mixing. However, with this cheat sheet I put together, I walk you through the sort of step-by-step processes of the mix and help you to make the right mixing decisions at the right times within your mixes. So if you're interested in checking that out, it's free. There's a link down there in the description box down below. I'll also put up a few other videos here on the Mining Microphone YouTube channel worth checking out. So go ahead and download that cheat sheet, check out one of these videos next, and I'll see you in the next one.